Welcome to the series of occasional interviews with pilot error author, scriptwriter, and producer Roger Rapoport. I'm Craig Powers, and in that film I play the role of French pilot Benjamin. We're continuing our conversation about the slow pace of reforms in flight tracking. Roger, could you tell us what some of the key factors are that make it difficult to find planes?
Well, the biggest problem is that a sea search is exceptionally difficult because you have weather working against you. Of course, working underwater is always difficult, even with the best sonar. A lot of the pingers and devices that allow you to locate the plane, some of them, they don't transmit to the surface, and the batteries wear out. So all of these things have worked against locating the Malaysia airplane. We should point out that the airlines involved, like Air France, Malaysia Air, and Air Asia, are all airlines that have pretty good safety records. I mean, they're considered to be good carriers, good, well-trained pilots. Certainly the captains have a lot of expertise, and they're flying very good airplanes, state-of-the-art airplanes. So the fact that it's happening on some of the best airlines, on some of the best planes, is particularly troubling.
There seems to be a connection between Air France 447 and Air Asia Flight 8501.
Well, the biggest question on both these planes is the weather and the potential of icing on the Air Asia plane, which was part of what caused the crash of the Air France jet. And the other question that's been raised is the pilot was asking for the possibility of being allowed to climb, which is in fact exactly what the Air France pilot did. And that raised another question, although we don't know that to be true. It does appear that he wanted to climb out of a storm, and in fact, the Air France pilot was misdirected by one of his instruments to make a climb, and that put him into a stall. So there's been a lot of speculation. Now, one of the things about AirAsia that's really important is that there was no Mayday call, which was very similar to Air France. No indication that anything was wrong. It hit the water intact, which is the same thing that happened to Air France. So a lot of these circumstantial aspects of the accident parallel what happened to Air France. And the question is, have we learned anything from the Air France tragedy? Obviously, the industry has made huge improvements in training. They've modified equipment. Stall avoidance procedures, many things have changed since Air France, but these are all things that don't involve big expenditures of money. There's more hands-on training now because of the Air France crash, although still not as much as there used to be. We don't have a generation now of military pilots coming in with 10 and 15 years experience like we used to.
The veteran pilots out of the military are not signing on as commercial pilots.
They can't make enough money to pay to live, so they have to take a pay cut when they leave the military, or even private aviation, general aviation, flying for corporations. So they have to take a pay cut to start at the entry level, and pilots on food stamps is not a joke. So as a result, you have to pay your dues for a number of years before you get into the higher paying categories. So there's a big shortage of pilots looming, and the industry has basically cut salaries to the point that most pilots really need another job, and they're repaying loans. So it's very, very difficult to attract pilots out of the military, say, or just people who go on to other kinds of work if they can make more money not being a pilot and survive.
You said that most planes, or all planes, have onboard radar?
Right.
What's the distance on that to be able to read storms ahead of them?
The onboard radar is pretty good. It's very robust. It ranges for 150 miles. But, the pilots have a lot going on. And in this case, this pilot somehow, because there was a lot of traffic and the air traffic control wasn't giving him much discretion, he was stuck in the red zone, which is where you do not want to be in a thunderstorm when you're flying an airplane. And a lot of pilots will not accept that, and they will just announce to air traffic control they're going to leave the path that they're on for safer air, and let air traffic control sort out the routing problems of the other planes. But in Asia, there's more of an acceptance of this, and the Asian carriers are the pilots tend to be more accepting of air traffic control direction.
What about the controllers themselves? Do they have access to satellites to read the weather?
Well, it depends. On, of course, over land, of course they do. And over the water, yes, in some situations they can provide very good information from satellites, but you understand they're managing a large number of airplanes. So to give specific routing information for deviation, they also have to take in consideration, as they did in Asia, that there were planes above and similar routes. And so rerouting isn't just a matter of saying, oh, well, there's this big storm over there. They've got all these planes that are, possibly in the way where there could be a conflict. The other problem is that they're not always in communication with the controllers. This was a case with Air France where the high frequency radio didn't work, so they couldn't even talk to the controllers. And in the case of Air France, the controllers didn't even know the plane was in the air in the zone where it crashed because they'd never gotten the flight route report from the airline indicating that that plane was in the air, that they never got the record of the plane flying.
So the pilots have computers that are misdirecting them, pitos that are freezing. They're caught in a storm. They don't have satellite radar. They don't have communication with ground controllers, and they're in the middle of a storm.
Right, and the flight plan that they filed for a dozen stations along their route never reached the controllers in Dakar, Senegal, that were monitoring this flight. So these controllers didn't even realize the plane was missing. Now, when you add all that up, you have a prescription for potentially a disaster. And of course, all of this has been exhaustively analyzed. This accident, which inspired our film, is probably one of the most important aviation accidents in the history of the industry, because many things that they thought could never happen did happen. And there's a feeling that all of aviation safety is divided into two chapters, before and after Air France 447. So when people say flying is safe, they are saying the truth. However, the reality is that when things go wrong, they can go wrong in a hurry. And clearly, in this instance, what we've learned is that there are many ways that a lot of these problems I just described could all be eliminated through some fairly on-the-shelf technology and some better training.
On the Air France flight, they did get the black boxes. They did get the information from them.
Right.
It's 5 years later.
Right.
They haven't acted on the information.
Well, actually, the French airlines and the French government has done a pretty good job. They've done a lot of hard work, and Air France has done a terrific job in response in terms of their own training and so on. They've really, one of the airlines that's really stepped up to the plate on tracking and a lot of other things. Unfortunately, other carriers have not been as accepting. For example, Air France is doing a lot of additional training now. Every single pilot at that airline is getting hands-on training, which is part of what caused problems. If you can imagine, most flights take place at cruise altitude, yet pilots almost never fly at that altitude. Therefore, they hadn't been trained how to handle the plane if in fact they had to take over. Well, now all that training happens. Every pilot, that carrier knows what to do at 35,000 feet.
Is that called the stick and rudder that you were talking about?
Yeah, it's called basic stick and rudder skills, correct.
What do the pilots around the world say about this?
Well, there isn't a pilot that I've talked to, and I've talked to hundreds, who doesn't think this is an important issue. And they would love to have more stick and rudder training. They would love to have more simulator time. And especially, they would love to be in a culture where they are respected by the public and by their employers, and not just treated as button pushers. And that's not just the matter of low salaries for starting pilots, or the issue of the fact that the pilots are not considered to be highly skilled. It's really the broader idea that, when they ask for something, whatever it is, that it ought to be taken seriously.
Thank you. These have been a series of interviews with Roger Rapoport, who is the author and screenwriter and producer of the movie Pilot Error. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Craig.
An airplane with over 200 people on it sinks to the bottom of the Atlantic. The best search crews in the world can't find it, and you don't want to cover this story?
Well, we've already covered it with stories from the AP, the New York Times Wire Service, Reuters.